Agostina Greg's son launches heartfelt appeal for safety enforcement. Jason Azzopardi says Bernard Gregg advised him not to get involved in an electrogas court case. A young student has penned a letter to the Prime Minister to save the environment. All this and more on Lovin Daily. Good evening and welcome to Lovin Daily. I'm Tim Diacono, joined today by Julian Bonici. And stay tuned for the end of this episode because we're going to be speaking to AI researcher Alexiei Dingli to discuss a new food saving app he launched recently to link soup kitchens and food banks with supermarkets and other food providers. But before we get to it, Lovin Malta spoke to the son of Agostina Gregg, an elderly Maltese woman who died in tragic circumstances recently. Julian, do you have the details about this?
Yes, so as Tim said, the son of Agostina Gregg, who's the woman who died in Malta's latest construction-related fatality, has issued a heartfelt appeal over safety and enforcement in the country. In John Pierre Gregg's words, he said, my mother's death could have been avoided. Agostina Gregg was just 64 years old when she died on a construction site in Marsa, and Gregg recounted how his mother, was just simply enjoying, her Sunday afternoon together with her family when they simply decided to go and check out the progress on a family member's apartment nearby. Agostina also wanted to take some food to a family member that was working on the apartment, all hinting at, the sort of loving and generous personality people have said after her death. Agostina was walking along a makeshift bridge when she fell to her death. The Story-High Bridge allegedly did not even have a railing or any safety measures that would have stopped someone from falling. Jean-Pierre told us, the scene of seeing my mother laying on the floor after she fell will traumatize me forever. I didn't even know what to do. To continue on with his quote, he said, "Why don't the relative entities check whether construction sites are safe? Why do they check afterwards? Why is safety not being enforced?" So obviously, as they hinted, it could have not just been Agostina. There are countless of construction workers on sites who also could have died. And really what they wondered was why authorities are only taking action once a fatality happens. As Jean-Pierre's wife said, it's a shame that someone needs to lose their life for action to be taken. Interestingly, Jean-Pierre also criticized certain reports made by the media, which gave the impression that she was in a quarry and not accessing an apartment through means of a bridge. He appealed for far more sensitivity when it comes to reporting similar stories, and it should be said, as much as a time of challenging for the family, it's important to always reach out. He also expresses disappointment at what he called useless comments that he read online about people reacting to their death. People were being so flippant about it, almost blaming Agostina for her untimely demise, stressing, that it only brought more pain to the family. As he said, for my mother's death, now all I want to do is raise awareness. I'm never getting back my mother now, and too many tragedies are happening in this country. First of all, our condolences go to the entire Gregg family and Agostina's relatives. I'm sure it's a very sad time, but as Jean-Pierre hints at, construction-related deaths are really nothing new. Time and time again, we're promised things will happen, and time again, nothing seems to happen.
Yeah, I think the problem over here is, besides the case itself, the culture of secrecy within the Maltese judicial system. We have a system where magistrates are in charge of investigation and they're quite notorious for releasing as little information as possible, with the argument being that if they say too much, it might end up working against them, either by some kind of legal challenge or some other legal development in the future. So the solution is to give as little information as possible to the public. Unfortunately, this has gone, I feel, to quite an extreme, and it is causing a lot of legitimate, of real pain to the victims, right? Because giving half the story sometimes and half the facts and leaving it open to interpretation, there is a grieving family in the middle of it all, and it's unfair on them, of course. You haven't only seen his mother die in such a gruesome way, and then to see people speculating about it. And yeah, the authorities could have done way more to prevent this from happening. Next up, former PN MP Jason Sopardi has said PN leader Bernard Grech had last year ordered him not to get involved in a constitutional court case against the Electrogas power station that Republica had filed challenging the deal. So Sopardi spoke to Lovin Malta about what happened last year. He said he had been working on Republica's legal arguments as it plans to file the case against Electrogas, or against the government about Electrogas. He spent around 2 months researching the legal and technical arguments about it, and then informed the PN via Francis Abidemec, or Secretary General at the time, that this is happening, and that he wants to be the lawyer of Republica on the case. And according to Sopardi, the Secretary General relayed this information to Bernard Grech, and then Bernard Grech told him, no, this is a conflict of interest, and you shouldn't, don't start a panic, don't start trouble, and don't take on the case. Sopardi didn't take on the case, and although now he has taken it on since he hasn't been elected. This is the latest dispute, obviously, between these two men. Bernard Grech's version of events is slightly different. He said that yes, this did happen, but the advice came from Francis Abidemec himself, and that is his placing himself out of the equation. The case itself is quite interesting, to be honest, and it's one of the latest civil action case against a major government project, and this will be developing in the months ahead.
Obviously, the latest news does raise some questions. Lovin Malta recently reported also how, Bernard Grech had once pledged to take Electrogas to court, but has actually never done so far, even though it is in PAC at the moment. And obviously, it has to note that it seems that the dispute between Sopardi and Grech is going to continue, even though the former MP has resigned from the party. What I have to say is, once again, this Electrogas deal is constantly stinking to high heaven, and whether it's linked or connected or has some influence over the top officials of the country remains to be seen. On to our next story now. The destruction of Malta's environment is a reality all of us know too well. I mean, just look out the window and see what's happening in front of your eyes. But now, thankfully, one young 9-year-old student has taken it in their own hands to pen a letter to Malta's Prime Minister asking him to save Malta's natural landscape. Now, as they always say, young people tend to say the truth, and even though it's such a simple letter, it really encapsulates everything that's sort of wrong with the environment. In very simple words, the young person tells the Prime Minister, listen, I'm writing to you because I love the environment and I think Malta can do better. He said, I'm only 9 years old, but I have a vision for Malta. It could be the most beautiful country, but one not clean or green at all. I always look out of my window and say, is this the country I live in? The young boy said, I love birds and I know so many lovely people who adore them, and they remind me over and over again that their habitats of birds and animals are continuously being destroyed because of pollution, because of development, hunting, shooting, fossil fuels, you name it. What he did urge the Prime Minister is to protect areas that are actually currently under development and facing certain things. Places like Burmarat, Ammeh, Dweira, Talway, Chadwick Lake, these are all places, unfortunately, as much as they're gems, they're being subject to controversial development. What he told the Prime Minister, leaving with a parting words, like, you can help the environment without even having to spend a cent. It doesn't only help nature lovers like himself, but also you and everyone in the country. It was a really moving letter from the young boy that really touches, at the heart of a really major issue that's affecting Malta, and even though it regularly tops surveys, nothing ever seems to done. Actually, I would say, I think we're actually getting worse. Tim, what do you think about it?
Yeah, good to see we have some visionaries in the country who look beyond turning Malta into the second Singapore. I think it's quite fair to say. So yeah, we're great of this kid to voice his concerns to the highest powers in the country. On another note regarding a similar topic, Michael Zavala, the Secretary General of the Malta Developers Association, warned that developers in Malta are facing market pressure to increase apartment prices further as a result of significant inflation in building materials, largely caused due to pressure caused as a result of the war in Ukraine. He said that the cost to build has risen by around 30 to 40% since the start of the war, which amounts to around 10,000 to 20,000 euro per apartment. And he made it quite clear that market pressures mean that ultimately these costs, what always happens is that it gets passed on to the consumer. In this case, it means that an apartment that costs 150,000 or 160,000 becomes 170,000 now. And my view is that that property in Malta is already extremely ridiculously expensive, especially when you consider what the same amount of money gets you in another European country, when you consider how low Malta's salaries are. And the prospect of them increasing further is not a pleasant one. And but this is apparently a market reality, and not really surprising to see it happen. And the MDA solution is for the government to clamp down on what it's calling excessive bureaucracy, such as, wonder of wonders, having third-party architects review method statements that developers send in, saying this is a waste of time, we don't need it, we can just trust our architects to say the right thing, and let's hurry up because time is money. Now, the problem with this is obviously that when the MDA speaks, it's interesting because you know the government's going to listen to them to incentivize the property market. But this issue of clamping down on bureaucracy, let's be very careful, because there were some rules, such as this one, which were introduced to reform the property industry after a series of apartment collapses in recent years that resulted in a debt as well, the debt of Miriam Patch. But let's not throw the baby with the bathwater just because a couple of developers want to finish their job more quickly. And there are other ways to regulate the market as well, just that no politician in Malta wants to speak about it.
Yeah, what I'm sort of struggling to understand from Mr. Stavala is how a rising price in concrete should result in removing strict regulations that were put in place for the cowboy contractors who led to the death of a woman and several other collapses. I'd also like to remind Mr. Stavala that in the case of Miriam Patch, the on-site architect was actually the one who wrote the method statement. It got approved by no one. Lo and behold, what the man said would be no risk of collapse led to the death of a mother of two. So what I really can't understand as well about Mr. Stavala is he's talking about rising costs, but we're actually seeing the property market booming. Michael Savala's predecessor, Sandro Ketkuti, throughout the pandemic kept on saying how the property market is booming. Actually, recent figures show that there are 3,200 new dwellings within the first 4 months of the year below, up by 60% from the previous year. What it sounds to me is Michael Stavala personally trying to use his pressure, trying to use the war in Ukraine to remove the regulations that are so well needed. Hopefully the government for once does not listen to the Malta Developers Association on this one. On to our final story, we're going to end it on a little positive note. Actually, some animals, some part of the environment actually being saved from development itself. So a community of hedgehogs which were endangered due to their habitat being under development in Loa were rescued by a group of residents along with Nature Trust. Following the mission, Nature Trust then wanted to extend its thanks to the Loa residents who were instrumental in saving this community of hedgehogs, which are of course protected in Malta. Obviously you can go on lovinmalta.com, you can see the few photos of actually this really cute family of hedgehogs who are going to potentially die because of overdevelopment in the country. Basically what they wanted to really urge is basically thanking the determination of volunteers and residents to sort of take action, to help, relocate these hedgehogs and catch them, to help relocate them, which is no mean feat. So really well done to the people involved, particularly Laura, a certain Laura, who's from Loa, for her marvelous support, and Jane and Phil, two wildlife rescue volunteers in the south of Malta.
Yeah, if you don't smile, at least like at the photo of that hedgehog being cuddled up. I honestly don't know what to say. So stay tuned for the next part of the show. We're going to be speaking to Alexiei Dingli about his new food saving app. Until then, here's a clip of an upcoming show. Tech Heads at Lovin Malta will be airing very soon. Stay tuned.
We have an issue at the moment because we're using the wrong terms. The metaverse is more of a concept. The only difference is that we need a blockchain layer built underneath it to ensure that everything is equitable. And I'm seeing young people, 13, 15 years old, they're making a lot of money just being involved in these spaces, creating NFTs, creating their own environments, opening their own shops.
Welcome back to Lovin Daily. With me now is Alexiei Dingli. Alexiei, thank you for being with me here today. So, Alexiei, you recently launched this new app called Save the Food. It's meant to encourage supermarkets to donate the food they don't need to food banks and soup kitchens. So, can you explain how this app works, please?
Okay, so the app is a rather simple app. Essentially, we all know that these supermarkets or other organizations that deal with food regularly have amounts of food which maybe they don't need, or they need to redeploy because probably they're going to expire pretty soon. So the idea is that they simply have to take a photo of this food item, write down the specifics on the app, and simply specify from where it can be collected. What happens on the other side is that the NGOs registered to the app will receive a notification, and the notification will alert them about these items. Then they simply select on the item they would like to collect, and they go and collect it. So the idea is like a sort of a marketplace, of course without costs, between these organizations that have food and the NGOs that are desperate to obtain food.
First of all, who is going to be donating food? Just for supermarkets, or is it anyone who sells food, restaurants?
No, we're dealing here with raw food, or canned food. The reason being that we want to be sure about the quality of the food being provided. Of course, we wouldn't like to have food which has some issues and redistribute it to people that are actually in need. So to do that, we're trying to avoid that by, of course, onboarding the supermarkets and the other organizations that provide these food items. So that's why I said not supermarkets, because we're not after cooked food over here, but more raw food or canned food.
Okay. How much interest has there been from the industry and from soup kitchens as well since you launched it?
Okay, so before the actual launch, we had meetings with NGOs, so they were quite interested because, of course, sometimes they come to a point where they don't have food. So we need to get the food wastage, let's say, to the NGO so that it can be repurposed. On the other end, we've also contacted a number of supermarkets. We're still in the process of contacting them, all of them, but yes, they are very willing to help as well. So hopefully we'll manage to combine these two needs, let's say, together.
Is there any indication of when it will actually start working?
It's working as we speak. So what's happening at the moment is the onboarding. Sort of, we're meeting them, explaining them how the process is going to work, and then of course they can just start using it.
So it's all ready,
yes.
And all it needs is for two of them to decide, let's start from today. We can start operating.
Now, what's important to point out is that the app is not on the App Store in the sense that it's hidden, because we would like to do the onboarding ourselves. That's the only reason. But the app is available and it can be used.
And how can a soup kitchen or food bank ensure that that the food that they're receiving is good quality food? Because at the end of the day, this is food that the supermarket wants to get rid of.
Yes.
But it can't be food that's gone off.
Uh-huh.
So what are we talking about exactly?
No, of course, when we're talking about packaged food, there's the expiry date or best before date. So it's up to the NGO to check whether it's valid food. There's also the responsibility from the supermarket's point of view as well, that, you know, here we're talking about good food which can be eaten. But sometimes some of the problem is related more to the visual of the food, no? So if you have some fruit, but they don't really look nice, so nobody will buy them. So in those cases, I mean, the food is still good for consumption, and both of them, I mean, can check whether it's still good to provide to those people in need.
So you launched this at the Soup Kitchen of OFM in Valletta, and you volunteer there, right?
Yes, I'm the deputy chair of the foundation.
How long have you been volunteering there?
Well, I've been there since the very start, actually from when I was still a mayor. I remember Father Marcellino coming over and telling me about this plan. And of course, you know, I immediately told him I was going to help him, but I started scratching my head because to collect €500,000, it's not an easy job. And actually, that's how the idea of the food app came about, because then we said, listen, how can we get food for the soup kitchen? And then the ball, of course, got rolling. So to answer your question, I think it's about 6 years now that I've been helping in the setting up of the soup kitchen and the running.
So you must have seen quite a lot of social realities
Yes,
in your time there.
Yeah.
So can you give some kind of examples of the things you've seen that perhaps a lot of people who live quite well off might not be fully aware of?
Yes, so I think I'll relate two particular cases that, you know, to a certain extent, I never really realized that in 2022 you find these cases. One of them is of this man that has a small apartment, but he only has one light bulb. So to go from one room to the other, he technically has to unscrew the light bulb and screw it somewhere else. And in fact, for this person, we helped him out with providing him more light bulbs. It sounds funny, but you know, these are the tragic realities which these people live in.
He couldn't afford another light bulb?
He couldn't afford another light bulb. And not only, I remember that when the president of Malta actually came, they also provided him with an electric water heater, because he was showering in cold water as well. So you know, I think we take these things for granted, yet these are the realities which these people are working on. The other case which really struck a chord is of this woman. Once she came up with 3 small children, and we didn't know the story initially. Eventually we got to know that their father was in prison and their mother simply left them, and I believe she was a relative of the mother, so she was taking care of these 3 children, and she actually had to leave her job to take care full-time of these little children. And you know, these stories really touch you, because you start wondering sort of how lucky we are on one end that you know, we don't live these realities. But then when you think that there are people who are going through these situations, you start wondering sort of how can we do even more to help them out. And that is what we're trying to do at the soup kitchen.
Absolutely. So when you launched this app, you mentioned that a few years ago, when you were still the mayor of Valletta, you had presented the president with this bill, a ready-made bill to ban supermarkets from getting rid of the food, of any kind of food, and to donate it instead. And you base it off this law that was presented in France. Do you still think this is a good idea?
Yes, actually it started in 2016 when they passed the law. It was actually a local councillor in, I believe, one of the municipalities of Paris that launched this bill. So what I did was I contacted him and asked him for a copy of the French bill. Of course, it was very different because the laws are different. Then I engaged a lawyer and he drafted out this sample bill, let's say. And then I presented it to the president, to the minister of the time, to the opposition counterparts. And I think the idea is quite simple and shouldn't take much, because all we're saying is, listen, if you know that, I don't know, in a couple of days, you're going to throw away X amount of food, then you are bound to provide it to those NGOs who are using that food to help the less advantaged people. So I think it's a very neat solution to solve this problem. So I don't really understand why, we're still talking about this bill when it should have been done many years ago.
And is it working in France?
Yes. It's not only working in France, but there's also a drive now for a European legislation similar to the one in France. In fact, a few years ago, they collected 1 million signatures from all over Europe to have it as a European legislation now. So, it's a simple system which works. So what are we waiting to adopt it?
Mm-hmm. And finally, if people want to help out, not necessarily supermarkets, but regular people, what do you suggest they do?
If they want to help out, I mean, we need all sorts of help. So, I don't know, manual works in the kitchen, even help on social media, for example. So all they have to do is contact us ideally via Facebook, and we'll get back to them, and we'll try to sort of work out according to, of course, their constraints. We're always happy to have new volunteers, and I'm sure that we'll find work for these people.
Alexiei Dingli, thank you very much for being with you today. Thank you for following us on Lovin Daily. Keep following lovinmalta.com for all the latest happenings, and have an evening full of lovin'.